Thank you all so much for coming out to the meeting today, the Democratic Club of the Villages. And before we get started, I want to recognize some of our guests. We have, of course, our Democratic Executive Committee folks from Sumter and from Lake over here. And we have the Democratic Women's Club of the Villages, represented by Sue Governor, the president. We have a new event coming up, a Hawaiian-themed party, Ohana. So if you want to buy a ticket, you should see Sue. There's a few seats left. And let's see, who else? I'll recognize our main speaker and our other main speaker in a little bit. I'm sure you all feel about the way I do every day, sort of equal amounts of rage and hope and fear and loathing. And watching Commander Chaos try to murder democracy. But we have ways of fighting back. I was just reading this morning some of the best news I've heard in a while. The congressional offices have received tens of millions of phone calls and emails. And none of them are complimentary. So I hope some of you are making some of those calls. We're going to give you some ideas for continued action later in the meeting. But we have a lot of work to do because this is a coup, ladies and gentlemen, inside, for the inside of our country. And we are the ones who have to fight and fight and fight and oppose and oppose and oppose and do it loudly. Let us stand for the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Next slide, please. And one more. So among the things the current administration hopes to erase is any mention of Black history, any mention of LGBTQ+, and anything about history in general in this country. While they're violating the Constitution daily and committing illegal actions, they want us to forget. They want only one type of history to be presented, and that's their history. So we have to remember, we have to make people remember. So I'm going to give you a couple of words here for as our reflection from John Lewis, the late John Lewis. Do not get lost in a sea of despair. Be hopeful. Be optimistic. Our struggle is not the struggle of a day, a week, a month, or a year. It is the struggle of a lifetime. Never, ever be afraid to make some noise and get in good trouble, necessary trouble. That is our reflection. All right, we begin today with our primary speaker, Dr. Mark Welton. He's well known to many people, I think, around the villages who have heard his presentations before. This one is on CRT, and it was no coincidence to my mind when first the 1619 project came out, tracing the institutional systemic racism embedded in our American experiment in democracy. That continues to this day. Or that after the George Floyd incident, where there was talk of police brutality methods going on around the country that have gone on for quite a while, that suddenly the Republicans were talking about CRT. And of course, deliberately lying and misleading people on what CRT was, is, and what it meant. Dr. Welton, who has a law degree, a master's in law, and a doctorate in law, as a recognizable scholar, an expert in international law, also speaks on many topics. This is one of them. So let's bring him up and hear what he has to tell us.
Okay, can everybody hear me? Yes. Great. This is an easy topic. It's part of a course actually I taught at the military academy at West Point, where I taught for 13 years as a civilian. It was a course on legal theory and philosophy. And it was part of that course. And so what I've done is extract this out and updated it. I have some slides, not a lot. And some of this is going to sound a little theoretical. So please bear with me. Because to understand what CRT is and get rid of all the political flack and all the misinformation and all the scary stuff about it, let's see what it really is. So we're going to start at a pretty high theoretical level and work our way down to what CRT really is. Because without that background, it doesn't make any sense. And then you get into the political discourse, which is convoluted and perverted, and it's just basically wrong. So we'll start out by doing that. So let's do the first slide. Okay. I'm going to talk critical theory because critical race theory is part of critical theory. Feminist jurisprudence is another part of it. At the University of Wisconsin, critical theory is taught, and the subcategories are feminist law and critical race theory. So let's go to the first slide. Okay, I said I'd start at a very theoretical level, so bear with me. Okay, in philosophical thought, a lot of people think, okay, we're going to talk pre-modernism, modernism, and postmodernism. What kind of world do we live in? Well, if you are a pre-modernist, and that was the dominant mode of thinking for many centuries in the Western world, and still is in many other parts of the world, basically you're looking at life or the world as a natural order of things. God and nature are paramount, whether it's a God or nature or whatever, and human beings are in this cycle, and we really can't control too much. So there's just a natural order of things. If you think currently some of the Republican political discourse is very pre-modern. The natural order of things is man marries woman, and that's it, and everything else is wrong. That's a very pre-modern sort of way of thinking. With the Western Enlightenment, then we get to modern thought. And we're very much in kind of a modern world in the West today, where science became dominant. Nature sort of was subservient to science, and the thought was, well, science can solve most of our problems. And so the idea, if pre-modernism is natural order, then the dominant theme of modernism is inevitable progress. Through science and so forth, humankind can just make progress in terms of equal rights and health and everything else. Today, postmodernism is prevalent in a lot of people's mind, and the idea of postmodernism is there's no meta-narrative. These are meta-narratives, natural order, inevitable progress. It's the way that the world works. Postmodern thinking is no, there's no meta-narrative like that. Your perspective, I'm going to talk more about this, depends upon many things. Your gender, your race, your age, your nationality. The way you look at the world can vary dramatically. So let's go to the next slide. So, again, these are intellectual trends. We're talking at a very sort of intellectual level at the moment. And we all know about things like postmodern art, which is very hard to decipher. We talk about postmodern politics. We'll get to postmodern law in just a second. Generally, the trend in the world is from pre-modernism to modernism into postmodernism. I put a couple slides up here. One of the things I talk to is Islamic law, and you see in societies, and in most societies, there's not one dominant mode of thinking. Most societies are not just pre-modern or modern or postmodern. It's a combination, and you have people of various sort of trends along that line. Iran is a great example. It's a very pre-modern society in many respects with a theological government. And in the city of Qom, where most of the Ayatollahs come from, they've got one of the most sophisticated AI and computer systems in the world. And you have a real clash there of pre-modern and postmodern thinking. So, the point of this slide is, these trends exist in every society. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, so we're getting there. We're winding our way down now. So, postmodern thought undermines the meta-narratives, the way of thinking of pre-modernism and modernism. Why? Well, it grew really in the 20th century. The 20th century, for postmodern thinkers, was a failure of modernism. We had 2 world wars in which science, the ideal of modernism, that science would lift us all up, was used for the extermination of whole groups of people, mass war in which civilians and military were slaughtered. So the idea of total war. Fascist Germany was the use of science, basically, to exterminate huge populations. And then a second trend of postmodernism that undermined the mode of thinking was, we live in today a society of incessant and overwhelming knowledge. We are inundated with facts, with theories, with pseudo-facts. It comes at us, almost incomprehensibly. And now we have artificial intelligence, and who knows what's going to happen with artificial intelligence. Is it going to undermine all sorts of ways we operate and think? And then the third factor, which postmodernists would say has undermined the way we've thought and acted in the past, we have constant movements and exchanges of people and culture. This is very unsettling to a lot of people, and you can look at the immigration argument in the United States. It threatens people, but live with it, because people move. If you go to Denmark, where I spend time, because I have relatives there, 20% of the population of Denmark are now refugees. It's multicultural, different languages, all of that. In the past, you didn't have this nearly to the extent you have it today. So these 3 trends in the 20th century and early 21st century have really undermined the pre-modern and modern ways of thinking. So let's wind our way down a little bit more. Next slide. Okay. So what are the principles of postmodern thought? First of all, there's no meta-narrative. There's no one way to explain how the world works. Science is not the answer to everything. Religion is not the answer to everything. And because we have so much information and so much thrown at us, you and I can't possibly absorb it all. It's very hard to make sense of it all. And so postmodernists will use the term skimming. We'll skim information. We'll try to get what we can. The pictures of Madonna and the cadets at West Point when I taught this love this example. Those who remember who Madonna was, because they were younger. Who was Madonna? Was she a Puritan, a patriot, a vamp? She changed her personality virtually every 6 months. She is a true postmodern icon. I can be whoever I want to be. Nobody is telling me, and I don't have to fit in any mold. She is a real postmodern artist. So, second point, a postmodernist would say, look, let's understand how you and I view the world. We view the world not because there's some overarching proper way to do it, but you and I view the world through our own personal backgrounds and prejudices. I can look at the world as a white, older male, and I can see things differently than my granddaughter, who's a 15-year-old young woman. I can see it differently than my parents-in-law, who were from Iran. I see the world very differently than they did. We shared much, but we had different perspectives. They intensely disliked certain things, like the British, because of what the British did in Iran. I'm kind of an Anglophile. Again, we look at the world from our own experiences. There's no binary to it. There's no right or wrong, black or white. They're just shades of gray. And then finally, and this is now where we're getting into critical thinking, critical theory, is in every society, the focus is on centralization of power. Those who have the dominant power in a society will by necessity exclude, and the postmodern term is outgroups. It can be gender, it can be race. Those who don't have power, those in power want to continue to exclude them from power. So, skinning, non-binary world, and a focus on power and the suppression or exclusion of outgroups. This is what postmodernists think. Next slide. Okay, now we're getting to critical theory. So what is critical theory? It comes out of postmodernism. It comes out of these tenets of postmodern thinking. Critical theory requires that if you look at, and we're talking law, politics, art, economics, whatever you want to, it requires consideration that the world has different perspectives, and the perspectives of you and I are culturally embedded. If you're a woman, you may look at certain things differently than I do as a male. If you're younger, you're going to see things differently than I do. If you're an American, you're going to see differently things than a Saudi Arabian may see it. So the culturally embedded attributes of the things up there, your wealth, your gender, your ethnicity, are going to affect the way that you see the world. The second point, critical theorists would say, deconstruction of language is critical. Language, and this could be written, spoken, picture, whatever, we have to deconstruct how it is used, because postmodernists will say language is used to suppress outgroups. It's used to keep power in the group that has power. And we're going to get that in a second when we talk about feminist jurisprudence and critical race theory. Language is critical, and you have to look beyond the plain meaning of the text to see what is really going on. And then finally, of course, critical theory rejects this idea that there's a natural order to things, or that the world is inevitable progress. Again, power and the exclusion and suppression of outgroups is central to critical theory. Next slide. Okay, now we're going to get to critical legal studies, and we're going to talk about feminist jurisprudence and then critical race theory, because it's part of this. Critical race theory comes out of this philosophical mode of thinking, this rejection of modernism and pre-modernism, and a focus on these tenets of postmodernism. Critical legal studies really emerged actually in the 1970s, primarily from the University of Wisconsin Law School. And there is a slide showing a course taught critical legal studies, feminism and critical race theory at the University of Wisconsin. The way that was taught was that the law, there are no such things as neutral principles of the law that everybody agrees on. Remember, your focus is on your gender, your view of the world is affected by your age, your wealth, your gender, and so forth. The students at the Wisconsin Law School, by the story, looked at the pictures of all the presidents and all the faculty members at the law school, and guess what? They were all white, they were all male, and they were all white. And they said, this is affecting how the law works in this country. So it's a rejection of that. So, deconstruction of language. Look at legal text, and look to how the law is written to preserve power for those who have it, and to suppress power from those who don't. And out of this, we have two offshoots: feminist jurisprudence and critical race theory. So let's go to the next slide. Okay, I want to talk just briefly about feminist jurisprudence, because that's half of critical legal studies. Feminist jurisprudence now, as you can accept what I say about what postmodernism is, understands that power is embedded in the patriarchy. Feminist jurisprudence looks to who has power, and they say it's males. Males have power. Now, this was primarily in the United States, but they look around the world and you can see how this works. So, Feminist jurisprudence, those who follow it, would say that law is a system of government in which men hold the power and women, the out-group in this case, are largely excluded from power. So, how does this work? Well, you deconstruct text, you deconstruct the laws. I've given one example here, and those of you who are lawyers will follow this. Rape law. For a long time, in many jurisdictions in this country, to convict somebody of rape, you had to show that the woman, the victim, and it's usually a woman, sometimes a man, but usually a woman, had to not give consent to the act. And how was it proven, or how was it demonstrated? It was demonstrated that the law placed the onus on the woman to show that she did not consent. And how did she do that? In many cases, they showed that, well, she didn't fight back. Well, what a postmodernist would say, or a critical theorist would say, was, what happens when a woman fights back when she is being raped? The odds are, and they show this statistically, she was substantially more likely to be killed or seriously injured, aside from the actual rape, than if she just submitted. She was more likely to survive it. But the law did not recognize that. It placed the burden and the onus on the woman to show what she did, not on the man or the male perpetrator. That's an example of how the law shapes the exclusion of women or the suppression of women. So, in this case, like all critical theory, suppression of an outgroup, those who don't have power, is reflected in the language and the interpretation of the patriarchy, and in this case, it's how the law worked for so long in so many jurisdictions, and still does, and in many countries, absolutely still does. Next slide. Okay, critical race theory. We finally got there. This is part of critical theory. So I think you can follow where we're going now. What is the out-group in a critical race theorist's mind? The out-group is a different race. In African Americans in the United States, it could be others in other countries, but it's the racial minority that is the out-group, and the racial majority wants to preserve its power by excluding the out-group. So, a critical race theorist would say, how do we combat that? How do we fight that? Well, text, remember? You look at the text, whether the text is a story, a law, a statute, whatever it is. And a critical race theorist would focus on narrative, storytelling. I can't convince you that I should have equal rights under the Constitution, because the Constitution clearly says, 14th Amendment, everybody has equal rights, I'm paraphrasing. Well, that's not how it works in action, is it? And so they would tell stories. It starts really, Uncle Tom's Cabin was storytelling about slavery. You can argue right and left, slavery is a moral bad thing. But when you told a story and wrote a book about how it really worked, what did it do to a lot of people in the North? It opened their eyes to how slavery really works. So a critical race theorist would say, we respond to the power of the dominant group by telling our stories, explaining our personal stories. And so you see this a lot in black literature or in feminist literature, telling the stories about how this power really works. Together, if you tell enough stories, then you can make society realize how things work, how the statutes, how the laws, how judicial decisions consolidate power in the group. 14th Amendment is an example. And I've given a couple examples. Political question and gerrymandering. We know what Congress does with gerrymandering. Okay? It redistributes or redraws congressional boundaries to keep those who have power in power. Okay? Well, you can argue it if both parties do that, everybody does it, but how is it dominantly done? It's dominantly done to keep racial minorities and other outgroups out of power. And statistically, and they'll show this through stories, they'll show it statistically, that is how it is used. So on the surface, it may seem perfectly fair, but in reality, it keeps those in power having power and keeps racial groups and others out of power. A critical race theorist would say, okay, how do we address this? Well, there are a number of ways to do it. You can focus on judicial process, the denial that this exists. Some of you may be familiar with the Supreme Court decision in the 1960s of Loving versus Virginia. In that case, a white man married a black woman in Virginia, wanted to marry black women in Virginia. That was a felony. They were both going to go to jail. It was not a misdemeanor, it was a felony. They could not do it. So they went to Maryland to get married where it was legal, moved back to Virginia, and they were both put into jail. It went to the Supreme Court. Question was denial of equal protection, denial of due process. The argument of the state of Virginia was interesting. Think of whether this is a pre-modern, modern, or postmodern argument. One of their arguments, they had two, was God put and this is in their brief, God put the races on different continents for a purpose, and therefore it is not up to us mere mortals to change God's purpose. That was in their brief. Is that a pre-modern, a modern, or a post-modern argument? It's pretty pre-modern. In fact, it's way pre-modern. Their other argument was, well, this is not discrimination because guess who's going to jail? Both the black woman and the white man. So we're treating them equally. Okay. The Supreme Court overturned that Virginia statute. And this was 1960s. We're not going back to the 19th century. Until the 1960s, it was interracial marriage in Virginia was a crime. But that was the argument, pre-modern argument. The other thing they said was guilt. And I gave this talk to another club in the Villages, and one of the people in the audience said, well, I don't buy this because, my granddaughter didn't do any of this. She wasn't responsible for slavery. She doesn't discriminate. All this is going to do is make her feel guilty. Well, my argument to this is, counter-argument is, not necessarily. I lived and worked in Germany for 13 years, and a German professor and I were talking about how do you deal with the Holocaust in Germany? How do you teach German kids about the Holocaust? Doesn't it just put the guilt on them and they feel guilty and you shouldn't be teaching this stuff? And they said, no. What we do is we take, and this was required in Germany, I don't know if it still is, we take all of our school kids at a certain age to the concentration camps and show them what happened. And the response from the kids was, do I feel guilty? Well, we don't teach the guilt. You didn't do this. You're not responsible for what happened. You're responsible to make sure it doesn't happen in the future. And by knowing your history, then you are aware of it. And I think that was, to me, that's a great response, but it was hard to convince somebody of that. We get into reparations, which is another issue. So that's what critical race theory is. Critical race theory is an outgrowth of critical theory, which is an outgrowth of a postmodern view of the world that says, look, there's not a universal right or wrong necessarily in how you decide a court case or how you draw a statute or how you do this. You have to take into account that the person, the judge up there who's deciding your case or the legislature who's writing your laws, do they absorb enough differing points of view so they can understand that what I'm doing is not just preserving power for my group, but it's distributing justice and it's understanding that outgroups need to belong. And as a judge, and I was not a judge, I was a military attorney doing international law for 23 years before I became a civilian professor. But judges would tell me right and left, yes, I understand that I'm, say, a white judge and stuff, and I have a black defendant. Do I understand enough about the social and economic and history behind this to incorporate that into my decisions? And a good judge, I think, will do that, understanding that he or she still has these embedded attributes that are very hard to overcome. So that's what critical race theory is. It's a way of looking at the world through a postmodern lens, understanding these things. There's no right, it doesn't mandate any particular political action. It doesn't mandate segregated bathrooms. It doesn't mandate this or that. It's a way of simply understanding how law, how culture, how society, how government works. And if you understand that, you are better able to give justice, fairness, and so forth. That's what critical race theory is. That's where it comes from. Properly taught, that's what it is. Thank you. I think we have time for questions.
Oh, sure.
So, okay, I don't know how you want to do this or how.
If you have a question, could you come to the microphone?
Yeah, I think that's the issue is the microphone.
Or I will come to you.
All right. Excellent presentation, Mark. Excellent. Based on what you have just presented here, I would assume that anybody who rejects critical race theory is a racist. And obviously, we have a governor, Ronnie DeSantis, who rejects critical race theory. So I would assume that he is a racist, and anybody that supports his thinking is a racist. Would you agree with this?
It could be.
Without being political.
Right, no, I don't want to be facetious about it. I understand exactly what you're saying. I am a white, older male. I grew up in a middle-class, family. I was privileged in many ways. Am I a racist? To some extent, of course I am. I view the world through my perspective, my lens. I have tried in my professional and teaching career to understand this, and by understanding it, understand where my prejudices come from and try as best I can to overcome them. Can I do that entirely successfully? It's very difficult. So, do I have some racism in me? Probably so. But I'm aware of it and I try to overcome that. That's why this needs to be taught. This is not going to, it's not going to corrupt anybody. It's not going to make kids feel bad, and I don't think they should be taught in nursery school, but it's not taught in nursery school. In Germany, the Holocaust is taught to 8th and 9th and 10th graders, the German equivalent, old enough to understand what is going on. So dealt with properly, this is just a way of looking at the world and making, I think, me, judges, politicians, aware of something that I think they need to be aware of. I don't know if that answers the question.
Thank you, Dr. Welton. Very insightful as always. And yet, here we are. We read in a book club, a number participated in the 1619 Project, which is banned in Florida, right? We can't read that history. College classrooms up until the graduate level in Florida cannot use the 1619 Project as a textbook. Federal government this week spent a lot of time scrubbing all the web pages from any term that would be associated with diversity, equity, and inclusion. There's a lot of question right now, even if the courts rule, will they hold? Because we know the courts don't have an army to enforce it. What are your thoughts in this context? Easy question.
Knowledge is a good thing. Okay, that's the first principle. When I taught this, and I taught law in the law department at West Point for 13 years, I'm teaching cadets at West Point. So you would have an image of what cadets at West Point are like. Conservative, all of that. Not true. You get a variety of cadets. You get a variety of perspectives. And what I found was they appreciated a way of teaching that taught this, didn't tell them what to think, but how to think, how to understand. And I think they got it. They were perfectly capable of dealing with this sort of thing. And in the Army, of course, you have you used to have different races, genders, and so forth. Who knows what it's going to look like in 2 years? I don't know. But I don't think I've ever read anything that has perverted my mind. And scrubbing textbooks and obliterating this history and obliterating the knowledge and so forth, how can that be a good thing? It can't be a good thing. And if you want to be very postmodern or pre-modern about it, why does it be done? It's to preserve the power of those who have power. That's my opinion.
I was just a little confused why they want to ban critical race theory in Florida, and they don't want kids to feel bad. I don't quite understand, even after a very nice presentation, what it is they're trying to keep from telling these people. What do they think is going to happen?
As it was explained to me by the person in the audience who said, we shouldn't teach this because my grandkids all it's going to do is make them feel bad for something they didn't do. And my response to that was, have a little more faith in your kids. You know, how old is your kid? First grader? Okay, you don't need to teach this to a first grader. But a fifth, sixth, seventh, eighth grader? The German kids, and I worked with the German government, I taught in German, I taught at German University, I did a lot when I was serving over there. They all had a really good outlook on the Holocaust. I'm not personally responsible, but my nation was, and I have a responsibility to the future. That's a very common sense, very educated, very proper response. I have more faith that American kids can deal with it the same way. The racial history, slavery, Jim Crow, all of that. If you don't teach it, we have a big problem. I have a lot more faith in the kids and our teachers, if they're permitted to do this, can do this, you know, without perverting anybody. But again, it goes to what do you want the kids to know and who are they going to support? I think there's a lot of politics behind it.
My concern is, where do you draw the line? If you can understand that we all come to life with different perspectives, different backgrounds, but what happens when a man or a woman shoots somebody that they don't even know, pushes them on the subway rail? If it's a black kid who was raised in a ghetto and never had much education, is he less guilty than someone who is white and educated? I mean, where do you know how to remove your thinking that we all come from different perspectives and say, but killing is wrong when it's done that way, deliberately, for no reason? How do you know?
Sure, it's a very good question. And some people will argue, well, if you're a postmodernist, everything is relative and there are no fundamental values, and everything just depends on who you are and your perspective, your background. And I think the response to that is, and it's certainly the response in the law schools, I have 3 law degrees, so I went to 3 different law schools, and each one was being taught. It's up to society. That then becomes the politics of society. Your society can agree on certain fundamental basic values. Murder is wrong. Homicide is wrong unless it's in self-defense. There are certain basic commonalities that we can all agree on. Where the critical race theory comes in is if a black person kills a white person or vice versa, it's murder unless there's a self-defense. End of story. They're guilty. Now, do you take into account then their background, socioeconomic background, the lack of parents, whatever? You can certainly take that into account in sentencing. You can take it into account and say, we have a big problem in this town or whatever. We're incarcerating too many black people, or we're not treating rape victims properly. And then it becomes a political matter of dealing with the root causes of it. But this is not a nihilistic theory that says there are no fundamental values, that you can't have laws preventing some sort of actions, preserving society, preserving law and order, and so forth. You can agree on those, but you just have to understand that when you are dealing with somebody, yes, you deal with those basic values. They committed a crime, there should be some punishment. But how we punish and then how we deal with the underlying causes of those crimes, then you take this into account.
Dr. Welton, I have a question. I would like to understand how we can take this information and bring it forward to action. For instance, one of your slides mentioned storytelling as a way to change the narrative. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Teaching those books, teaching those stories in schools.
We can't teach them.
I understand that, and that's a crime. I mean, that's criminal, not to teach that. How do we do it worldwide? We don't abolish USAID. You know, we go out and teach. And so, it's basically education. I mean, it boils down to education at whatever level. Making these stories public, making these stories available. Yeah, I don't know if any better way to do it than that, is to educate. Just make the stories known. Have people read these books. Don't abolish them from schools. Teach it. And increase awareness. That sounds very superficial and easy, but I don't know of a better way to do that.
Thank you.
You spoke about the German education, and I've never been to Germany. And recently in the news, Musk was saying we shouldn't, in Germany, that they should not be feel bad about their history. But what's your sense in Germany? Is there a sense of guilt based on how they're teaching the children? Or is it, which I don't think should be, but what's your sense of how the population feels?
Yeah, I lived in Germany, worked in Germany 13 years, and I've been there several times in the last 2 years, talking to friends and talking around and so forth. Germany, like any society, is going to have different groups. You know, it's not universal. To my understanding and my belief is the vast majority, the large majority of Germans, all ages, that's not a sense of collective guilt, it's a sense of collective understanding that our grandparents now at this point, that our country was responsible for crimes against humanity. And that we have a responsibility, for instance, recent, you take, what's the new right-wing party in Germany, AfD. You know, it has about what, in the last, well, the election's coming up this month in Germany. Maybe 15% popularity. You know, that's not big, but it's not insignificant either. So you're going to have people in Germany, and I've talked to some of them, who resent the immigration into Germany, because they've had large-scale immigration, and so as you know, they welcomed a lot of the immigrants. It can be very disruptive to society. Remember, the idea of postmodernism is this disruption of the natural order confuses people. It makes a lot of people uncomfortable and unhappy. But my response is, that's about 15%. I think the vast majority of Germans, when you have marches by the neo-fascists in Germany, look at the responses, look at the marches opposing them. It's overwhelmingly opposed to neo-fascism and right-wing extremism. So I understand where it's coming from, and any society is going to have disruptions like this, but I'm comfortable with Germany as understanding their history and their responsibility to ensure that their role in the world and their country is fairness and equality and understanding these sorts of things. Yeah, I'm optimistic about Germany.
Hi there. I just want to say your presentation was incredible. You took philosophy, that's a very difficult thing to teach, and broke it down so beautifully. I'm a 30-year career retired educator of English education. I taught at the highest, thank you, I taught at the highest levels, and I want to give some hope to the audience instead of despair. There are still people out there like me who didn't retire. They teach advanced placement, they teach international baccalaureate programs, and until those things die, you have teachers in the classroom teaching Uncle Tom's Cabin like me. You have teachers teaching Holocaust education, which by the way is on the books as a law in the state of Florida. And you really have to look at how it's being taught, not what is being taught. If we teach it as fact, like someone had a question, oh, do the Germans feel guilty? It's fact. And we're there to make sure it doesn't repeat. When Harriet Beecher Stowe told her story, it was embedded in a narrative, but it was fact. And people had to digest it. And the beauty of it is that we still have educators out there. I'm going to take a big deep breath. Because the Department of Education funds many of the programs, especially in the state of Florida, that are these inclusive programs. And I'm hoping that the educators are still out there like me, even though I retired, fighting and teaching the narratives. Because, oh, and I wanted to say this too, I'm sorry, because this has to do with the German question also, that when you're dealing with, I dealt with a very multicultural population. I worked in Miami, so and I taught, for example, Huckleberry Finn or Uncle Tom's Cabin. And I had African American students or Hispanic American or white people in my, white Caucasians. Nobody felt guilty. It was how I approached it. The N-word is said 360 times in Huckleberry Finn. Nobody flinches because it's how you approach it. And I still have hope in the world that we're still out there. The majority of us are out there doing what we should do. And thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for the comment, and I concur completely. It's not what you teach, it's how you teach it. You need to teach the facts. How you teach it can be appropriate for your age and whatever age it might be. But the facts are the facts. And when we start perverting facts and talk about, well, I won't even use the term, it makes me cringe, facts that are not facts. Anyway, you're exactly right. You need to teach the history and the facts, how you teach it, and it works. Give some confidence to teachers, give some credit to teachers, and credit to the kids. They're not stupid.
Dr. Welton, we have time for one more question.
Well,
I feel a little guilty about how we treated African Americans and how we still do today. Could be because I'm Jewish and guilt is part of it. But I don't think guilt is such a bad thing because it makes you aware of what's happening around you. I also feel, well, guilty and a little helpless about what's going on in the country today. And I'm wondering, by your experience in Germany, did you see the seeds of neo-Nazism rise? What do you see as that relates to the United States today?
The short answer is yes, I did, but really countervailed by the vast majority who just absolutely oppose that. I mean, the stuff is taught in German schools. They know their history. And so the vast majority, when you look at the neo-fascists and the neo-Nazis, where does it primarily come from? Primarily from the former Eastern Germany, because the former Eastern Germany is still underdeveloped economically and they don't have as much wealth, they don't have as much economic opportunity. So to some degree, there's a frustration that can build in it. And when you're frustrated, where do you often turn to? Well, blame somebody else. I may be poor, but at least I'm white, and they're responsible for this. So that's how I see Germany. And as far as guilt goes, go with it. if it's constructive and it doesn't burn you down too much, perfectly fine. I understand exactly what you're saying. When I say the kids in Germany aren't guilty, by and large, they don't feel guilty, but there's a sense of that. The guilt, the responsibility comes from the guilt of not me, but what my parents or grandparents did, and my country did, and I need to stand up to that, and that's my goal. That's my understanding.
Thank you. Thank you. Dr. Welton will stick around till after the meeting, so if you have questions that you didn't get to ask, you can come tackle them up here later. Okay, let's continue our education. Where's Diane? Who's running the spot, Jim? Oh, somebody click a button here.
I forgot.
Marsha. Let's continue our education with Marsha Shearer.
Well, thank heavens for these steps. Wow. Thanks, Dennis and Mark. One of my great pleasures in life is that I belong to a book club with Mark Welton. So I just want to mention something about critical race theory in my experience. I also belong to another book club in our neighborhood. And if you host the book club, you get to name the next book. So I chose this 1619 project. Most of our members are love novels, the sexy stories, but 1619 was hardly that. And when we met, the first thing a woman said to me was, "This is a bunch of crap." And I said, "All right, let me ask you a question." And Mark kind of alluded to this. Who would you rather be? Poor and white or rich and black? And think about it and all that that entails. And she said, "Oh my God, now I understand." So, talking about education, this is so perfect. We are excited to announce that the Education Forum has now been approved as our own club. This is a big deal. To meet that requirement, we have to show consistent interest through attendance. We just celebrated our 1-year anniversary. Monthly meetings have consistently drawn an audience of between 30 and 50 or more people. Our presentation and discussion topics have included book banning in schools, understanding the difference between the voucher and charter schools and how each are funded, DEI, homeschooling, among others. Our next topic is the truth about vaccines and their impact on school education. And a former professor at a nursing school who has trained many, many nurses, school nurses, will be our main presenter, and that's one of ours, Shirley Shantz. We meet on the 4th Sunday of the month, and that will change to the 3rd Sunday beginning in April, but don't worry about that yet. Our next meeting is February 23rd at Hibiscus Rec Center at 2 o'clock. Our ongoing meetings will be announced in the Buzz as well as the Rec News. It's important to note a couple of things. The forum is for everyone. Having been a teacher or a school administrator is not a requirement, nor is being a Democrat. Our group is nonpartisan. Everyone is welcome. There's an old Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. There's no doubt the changes education at all levels are continuing to experience will be impactful. But how? And how do we respond to the local and federal actions? What can we do to make a difference? This matters. Most of us have grandchildren in the public school system at various levels, from kindergarten through college. And knowledge is the first step toward action. So come join us. We'd love to have you. And let me end this by saying that all of this success is due entirely to the dedication and effort and forethought of Jerry Van Leuven, with help from her husband Marty, and Jim and Jill Greenberg. So when you see them, thank them. Thank you so much. Wrap that tonight.
Ma'am, can you repeat the time and place of the meeting?
Yes, February 23rd, Hibiscus Rec Center, 2 o'clock. Watch your buzz. All that information will be in it.
Name of the group.
The Education Forum. It's a discussion group.
Thank you, Mike. All right, next slide, please. All right, you couldn't get away without this. Next slide, please. So, among the people kissing the royal butt these days is Florida Congresswoman Ana Paulina Luna, shown here as small as I could get her on the screen. She has suggested that Trump should be added to Mount Rushmore and has introduced a bill to do that in Congress. So I got to thinking, well, how would they squeeze him in there? And as a former journalist, I went hunting around and I found a source, and I have uncovered a conceptual drawing of how this would look in reality. So I'm going to reveal that to you now, a little exclusive. Next slide, please. Works for me. So I pull my glasses up for the next little bit here. So I've been reading a lot of stuff, of course, to see what people are writing about what's going on. And I found a favorite Substack author, Jeff Tedrick, who does the best headlines on his columns of anyone I've found. So I'm going to read you like 3 from just the last few days, so you can get an idea what this is like. If I can find the right note card. Okay. Befuddled old blithers about $2 plane tickets. Befuddled old coot gets pantsed by Canada and Mexico. And Antichrist speaks at National Prayer Breakfast. So you have someone following this who really is delivering the goods. His columns are pretty hysterical to read, but also right on the money. And that leads us into the portion about resistance and what we can do. Next slide, please. One more, please. Oh, never mind. Back up. Lost my place. Okay, so I mentioned the 10 million, or millions and millions of phone calls coming out and emails, and I think that's a great idea. We have some other ideas that have been raised. Amy Shaw, the club's parliamentarian, elected officer, has an idea that she floated in the Facebook group that got some response, and I wanted to tell you about that, so you might engage in that as well. Amy?
Thanks, Dennis. Good morning, everybody. Can you hear me in the back? Yes. That's it. So, as Dennis alluded to, lots of phone calls going in. We're hearing that the Capitol switchboards are blocked and overwhelmed. People are sending letters, people are sending emails, some of them are bouncing back. I know several people who have just gotten tone-deaf responses from our particular representatives in Congress, and we're pretty convinced that they don't listen to us and they don't care. So, in the interest of making John Lewis's good trouble, I think we need to take our voices to them. So I've put together, very loosely put together at this point, an opportunity for us to go as a group to see the various representatives that we have. And what I'd like to do is have sort of like a rolling group, so we can kind of be in their face at least once a week about, different topics and all. And I think that if we all show up together, then they see that there's a mass of people. And then if we each go in and individually speak to the congressperson's staff about our concerns, then we might just disrupt things a little bit and keep them from doing what other BS they're busy doing on behalf of their people. So that's what I'm trying to put together. And I'm hoping a lot of you will choose to get involved. It's not going to be a lot of time commitment. I mean, you can sort of come in and come out as you please. So I did a little research for this and discovered Scott has offices, the nearest ones that he's got in Florida are in Orlando and Tampa. Moody has no Florida offices listed yet, but I'm keeping an eye on that. Webster has a permanent office in Claremont, and he's in the Villages on Mondays. So I'd like to start next week, Tuesday the 11th, and honestly the reason we're not going to the Villages is because I just can't do it Monday. So Tuesday the 11th, we're going to go down to Webster's Claremont office, whoever can participate. We'll meet here, drive down together, give people rides if they don't have a way to get there. And then the following week, we'll meet and we'll go to Scott's Orlando office. So if you're interested in doing this, these two are headed south, so we'll just meet at 9 o'clock Tuesday morning in the Everglades parking lot and make sure that everybody's got a ride and we can get there. I'm going to sit at one of these tables in the back
I hope, after the meeting. So if you're interested, if you would just come and leave me, your contact information, and then also what village you're in case we have people who need rides, so we can sort of set people up together with that. And, I hope that you'll come out and maybe they'll notice that we're here and we're paying attention.
Thank you. Hello. All right, just one more. Pot of juice. So we ran out of juice too. Okay. All right, thank you, Amy. We're looking for ideas of things to do and actions to take, and we're hoping that each of you will think of an action you can participate in and go do it, because we need to make a lot of noise. All right. Next slide, please.
Excuse me, can I just say something? I was involved with something big on Long Island trying to get floor representatives. The Democratic Party pledged a lot of support. They didn't come through. We lost those seats. But the interesting thing was they sent down to Long Island every important Democrat, including the Jeffries. I have a picture. Everything they did right to get a big thing happen, everybody. But the Democrats do something, this is what I want to add to your problem here. They didn't advertise it, they didn't put it on TV, they lost the opportunity, I don't know how much it cost them to put this on, and they didn't know how to push it. If you're going to do that, which is a wonderful idea for everybody, because now we've got an idea that's action, okay? You need to advertise, to get people out, to get pictures, to get it into the papers, to see what you're doing, so that you get the benefit of this action that you're taking.
Yeah, thank you for that. Particularly going to Orlando, I think we could probably get to the TV stations and let them know we're demonstrating. They love the old people from the villages coming somewhere. Aren't they cute? They're not in golf carts this time. Okay, so I think this is next. Okay, so we had a very good day. Thank you for your generosity. I think I was told we raised probably the highest amount we've raised in a couple of years. Of course, that also means if you win the raffle, you get the highest amount we've got in a couple of years. So there's 3 prizes today. And here's the first ticket. Uh-oh, I broke my glasses and now I've got to read these. It's going to be with one lens. All right, 660-5102. And you can come collect afterward. You don't want to run up here unless you want to celebrate. Do I have a winner? I can't see you with these on. So.
It's me. Just kidding. You said you couldn't see me, so I thought I'd try.
Nice try, Cindy.
Yeah.
All right. No winner? Oh, okay, great.
Could you repeat it?
660-5102.
Okay.
All right, we have a winner. All right, second ticket.
Special election in Florida.
Yeah.
So they,
I'll get there. 560-3570. Shout out if you win. I really can't see you. Like I'm in a fishbowl. Okay, great. Are the winner? All right. And 560-3667. 3667? No? All right. You got like 40 tickets. Okay, that's it. All right, we have a winner. All right. Next slide, please. All right, we have a new club board elections on March 8th. That's our next meeting. And here's the candidate slate, just to remind you real quickly. Next slide. Bill Newton for president and Phyllis Leopold for vice president. Next slide. Amy Shaw for parliamentarian, Ash Marwalk for treasurer. Next slide. Georgia Schonauer for membership, Susan Houston for hospitality. Next slide. Directors, Kathy Huber at large, Patty Rasdell London for at large. Next slide. Dale Kramer for at large, and Melissa Keller for at large. Next slide. Special election for appointed secretary, Lori Shipley. And thanks again to our nominating committee. Next slide. The March 8th meeting is at Lake Myona. So make sure we get you to the right place. It'll be in the buzz for several weeks. And we'll just show up over there. A reminder that there's an April 1st special election coming up that includes portions of Lake and Marion County, including villages, neighborhoods, and precincts. So we're going to try to get candidate Josh Weil, the Democrat, here for next month's meeting, so you can meet him. But there's literature and things going out and around, and he's got a huge district, so we hope we can get you engaged as part of that. All right, next slide, please. I want to also acknowledge the board members who have served and who are leaving the board at the end of this term, which ends March 31st. Susan Jones and Lee Strickman will be departed. We say thanks to them. Next slide. Mary Pierce and Eric Lipsetz. And the final slide, these two yahoos.
Everybody sit down. Won't take long. First off, I'd like to thank my vice president for taking over the speaking duties. He's done a great job. I've worn this shirt with pride. I'm proud to be your president, and I've done everything I can to help forward this club. I'd like to thank some people who work in the background. All my registrar ladies and Sharon Chido that helps with the signs, and Sheila that greets you at the door, and Harriet and Cindy Galatro, Carolyn Freed that has sent out a ton of welcome letters to new residents. There's so many people that help us make this work, and I want to thank you all. And I want to thank you all for everything you do in the future to keep us on a different path than the one we're on now. Thank you so much.
I want to thank these two. I met him here She's walked with me, cried with me, everything. Just she doesn't judge me. She's been wonderful. And I would never met her if I weren't here.
That's all, folks.